While Trump celebrates the ceasefire in that little theater in Jerusalem, he's patting himself on the back. There's another story in Europe that I wanted to talk to you guys about that shows exactly what's happening. You could probably call this donor-driven elite policy and what it looks like when it goes full authoritarianism on the general population. This one hits different because it's not about foreign wars. It's about what happens when your own government decides that you don't get to choose who lives in your neighborhood anymore. Sweden is insane. I don't even know. This, by the way, thank you to the person that emailed me a bunch of links. You know who you are. I actually read my email, you guys. So if you want to email me stuff like that, scoops, information, I spend all day researching this stuff to prepare. So the Social Democratic Party just had their Congress in May 25, and they formalized this policy that they're calling population mixing. I'm not joking. We have to be real what that actually means. They're forcing native Swedes to accept migrants in their communities, into their schools, into their neighborhoods, whether they want to or not. Does that sound familiar to you? I think America went through something like this. And when I say forcing, I mean like literally they're being forced, not with bayonets and weapons pointed at them, but in another way, a very communist kind of way. So the party's slogan is literally, nobody has the right to choose their neighbor. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's their actual campaign message. Nobody has the right to choose their neighbor. Think about that for a second. Your government telling you that you don't get a say in who moves in next door, who your kids go to school with, who your community, or I should say, what your community looks like. And this is coming from the same party that spent the last 50 years importing hundreds of thousands of migrants from Somalia, fucking Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq. This is the same party that created the conditions where native Swedes fled to wealthy villa towns to get away from the crime. And now they're following Swedes into those safe areas and forcing them to take migrants there too. So the hypocrisy is fucking breathtaking. Here's the timeline for everyone. So back in the 70s, Sweden's parliament unanimously adopted multiculturalism as a national policy, right? So the socialist government was saying that we're going to be diverse and humanitarian and open our borders. And the migrants came, hundreds of thousands of non-Europeans, right? And they didn't integrate at all. Shocker. Shocker to literally nobody. They formed parallel societies in the suburbs. Welfare dependency, gang violence, cultural practices that are completely incompatible with Swedish values. And the crime rates exploded. Okay, Sweden's rape rate increased 1,472% since 1975. 1,472%. Do you understand what that means? You have 42,000, nearly 43,000 reported rapes in the last 5 years alone. 997 bombings. 40,000 women subjected to genital mutilation. Let me say that again for you. 40,000 women with female genital mutilation in Sweden. In fucking Sweden. And native Swedes looked at this and they did what any rational person would do. They moved, bro. They self-segregated into wealthy areas where they could raise their families safely, right? And where their daughters wouldn't get fucking raped walking home from school, where their property wouldn't get blown up by gang warfare and all this crazy shit. And the socialist elites call them racist for it. Unfucking believable. Now, the same elites are doubling down. So instead of admitting that mass migration, immigration, whatever you want to fucking call it, failed horrendously, instead of closing the borders and deporting the criminals, instead of demanding assimilation, they're forcing population mixing. They're saying that the problem isn't that we brought in the people who won't integrate. The problem is that Swedes won't live with them. Fucking liberal logic. So here's what they're doing, guys. Here's their galaxy brain plan. They're banning municipalities from placing new migrants in the suburbs that are already overrun with crime. So instead, they're mandating relocations to wealthy areas. Socioeconomically strong zones is what they are, right? So they place, or I would say, the place where the native Swedes moved to escape all this bullshit. And they're using housing policy to do this. They're seizing land. They're reallocating property. This is fucking treason. They're building subsidized apartment buildings in the middle of villa towns. single family home neighborhoods getting these rental complexes that are fucking dropped in there with state subsidies. And if municipalities resist, if the local governments say, no, we don't want this shit in our backyard, the national government withholds infrastructure funding until they comply. That's not dude, that's extortion under the guise of policy. That's insane. In education, they're busing, children now in small towns that they centralized the schools, and then they started transporting these kids to achieve what they called mixed schools, because 75% of students in some areas had foreign backgrounds. So they're busing Swedish kids into these environments. They're taking your child and putting them into a dangerous school filled with migrants that have not assimilated, migrant children. You're going to see videos of Swedish boys and girls getting absolutely fucked up in these schools where they're going to be hated and the minority in their own country. They're using them in what critics call integration tools. Swedish children, dude, they're being used as tools to integrate migrants who refuse to assimilate. How fucking maddening is that? This is treason. Your government, the Swedish government, is putting your kids on buses and sending them to schools with 75% foreign students from cultures where women are property, where honor killings are normal, where sexual assault rates are through the fucking roof. And you're supposed to smile and call that shit diversity. And they had a televised debate, right? And during the televised debate, the Social Democratic leader, her name is Magdalena Andersson, she was confronted about this exact problem. And she denied it. It's no surprise, woman too, this is coming from a woman. She said the accusations of forced mixing and busing children are fabrications, lies. Except the Congress documents explicitly state that the population must be mixed. They have a dude named Jonas Attinius, and he's the senior in Gothenburg, an official, and he got quoted as, the population must be mixed over a generation. Not encouraged to mix, not incentivized to mix, must be mixed by government force. Holy shit. You thought America had problems. And the person heading the integration working group says that they're serious about breaking segregation, and they're going to use housing as the primary engine for this change. And when they say they're breaking segregation, what they mean is breaking up Swedish communities, forcing them to accept what their government imposed on them. And this is the part that makes it should make you fucking enraged. The elites pushing these policies, the party leaders, the wealthy socialists, where do they live? Take a guess. In segregated areas, wealthy enclaves, in protected communities where, they don't have to deal with any of this stink. They live in the exact same self-segregated neighborhoods that they're condemning native Swedes for creating. But when regular Swedes try to protect their families, try to choose safe neighbors for their children, that's racism. That's bigotry. That must be destroyed by state intervention. And when you point this out, they'll call you a Nazi. They say that you're far right, that you hate immigrants. You're against diversity, you fucking bigot. But this isn't about hating immigrants. This is just what happens when you import hundreds of thousands of people from cultures fundamentally incompatible with values that are incompatible and then refuse to demand that they assimilate. And what this creates is basically massive crime and social problems. And then your solution is to just force everyone else to live with the consequences of your failed policies. That's bullshit. So let's talk about what the consequences actually are, because the statistics are fucking horrifying. I only read you a few. So 1,472% increase in rape since mass immigration began. And we're not talking about date rape or gray area consent issues. We're talking about gang rapes, child rapes, violent sexual assaults by migrants from cultures where women who aren't covered up are considered fair game. Swedish girls, teenagers getting gang raped by migrant men who face criminal consequences that are minimal at best because the courts are terrified of being called racist. I shit you not. And when parents try to protect their daughters by moving to a safer area, by choosing schools with fewer foreign students, the government shows up and forces mixing on them. They had 997 bombings in 5 years. Think about that. In Sweden, this is one of the safest countries in the world for decades. It used to be, at least. Now they're averaging 200 bombs per year. Gang warfare over drug territory, grenade explosions in general. They're turning Swedish cities into war zones. and 40,000 cases of female genital mutilation. 40,000 women, you guys, who had their genitals cut off because their families brought that fucking practice from Somalia, and nobody in the Swedish government had the balls to say that's not acceptable here. We don't do that. If you want to live in Sweden, you have to leave that barbaric shit behind. But they didn't say that. They said diversity is our strength. They said we must be tolerant. They said that questioning these practices is Islamophobic. And 40,000 women paid the fucking price for that. And now when Swedes self-segregate to protect their families from all of this, the government calls it a problem. You know, calls it creating parallel societies. Yeah, the Swedes are creating the parallel society in their own society. Does that make any fucking sense? And then it forces them back into contact with the exact populations that they were fleeing. The policy is called integration. But let's be honest about what that actually is. It's punishment. It's the Swedish government punishing native Swedes for noticing mass immigration failed completely and totally. For noticing that the rape rates exploded, for noticing that their daughters aren't safe anymore, and for having the audacity to move somewhere safer. White flight, how dare you? So now you're going to mix, whether you like it or not, citizen. Nobody has the right to choose their neighbor. Your kids are going to go on the bus to the 75% foreign background school. Your wealthy neighborhood is getting the subsidized housing complex. And if you complain, you're a bigot. So government apologized, and this is how fucking far gone Sweden is. The government, you guys, has apologized to migrants for placing them in the suburbs initially. The government said that society needs to intervene, and comprehensively as well, over a generation to fix this integration debt. Integration debt? Excuse the fuck out of me? Like Sweden owes something to the people who came as refugees and then formed parallel societies and then refused to adapt to Swedish values. They have a debt to them. What debt? You took them in. You gave them welfare. You gave them housing, opportunities, and they responded by creating no-go zones where the police can't even go anymore. They formed criminal gangs. They maintain practices like fucking cutting off, genitals, mutilation, all that stuff. Honor killings, raping Swedish women at rates 1,400%. That's insane. And Sweden owes these people a debt? Are you fucking kidding me? The party's billing this shit as a U-turn. Believe it or not, on integration, this is a U-turn for them. They're acknowledging that the past policies of placing migrants in suburbs didn't work, but they're not acknowledging why it didn't work. They're not saying we brought in too many people too fast. They're incompatible with our culture. No. They're not saying that we should have demanded more assimilation. Not saying that we should stop letting in 94,000 migrants per year when the economy is shrinking and their welfare system's collapsing. No. You know what they're saying the problem is? Segregation somehow. Swedish people choosing to live with other Swedish people. That's the problem, comrade. I get it now. So we'll fix it by state force now. And when you look at who's pushing this shit, follow the money, you guys. Follow the donors. Follow the NGOs that profit from mass migration. Follow the construction companies that get contracts to build the subsidized housing. Follow the politicians whose careers depend on the minority voting blocks that they fucking import. Scumbag cocksuckers. This is Sweden's version of what we talked about with Trump and Adelson. Foreign interests and elite donors dictating policy that fucks over regular citizens while the people making the decisions are insulated from those consequences. Anderson, the female leader, who's standing there denying forced mixing while her party's Congress documents explicitly mandate the shit. And they're all living in these wealthy segregated areas while forcing other Swedes to accept migrants in theirs. Sounds like our Democrats. Sounds like our Republican elite. The same hypocrisy as Trump joking about Adelson not saying if she loves America more. These are elites, and they're making the decisions that regular people have to live with. And when regular people try to protect themselves, you try to create a safe fucking community for yourself, for your family, the government comes and crushes you for it, right? So they're thinking, okay, what does this mean for Sweden's future, for example? Because we're not just talking about policy. Right? We're talking about demographic replacement, cultural destruction, wholesale by the state, the end of Sweden and Swedes as you know it. If you force population mixing across an entire country, If you bus children to majority foreign schools, if you build migrant housing in every Swedish neighborhood, if you do this over a generation like they're planning, what do you get? You get a country where native Swedes are a minority in their own homeland, where Swedish culture is diluted and eventually erased, where entire neighbors that were once safe for a fucking 1,000 years become dangerous, as they have been for the past 20 years in Sweden. Look at Malmo. It's a shithole. Women can't walk home alone. Gang violence reigns supreme. Islamic cultural practices replace Swedish ones. That's the future you want for Europe? And before someone says that's hyperbole, that's not how any of this shit works. Look at the suburbs they already destroyed, motherfucker. Look at Malmo. Look at the no-go zones. That's what happens when you concentrate migrants from non-assimilating cultures. Migrants, period, that don't assimilate. I'm not even going to give you the culture route. Fuck that shit. Fuck it. I don't care. Culture or not. Migrants, end of story, that don't assimilate. And then they're spreading across the entire country by force at the hands of the government. The Social Democrats know that this will take a generation. They're admitting that much at least. And a generation of forced mixing, no less. A generation of Swedish children being used as integration tools by the government, right? You have generation of property seizures, mandatory relocations. What the fuck communist shit is that? And at the end of all that, at the end of that generation, Sweden won't be Swedish anymore. I guarantee it. It'll be balkanized mess of competing ethnic and religious groups with no shared values or culture. Look at the UK. Look at London. Look at fucking Paris. When the crime rates that make it unlivable and then coupled with Sharia law in some areas, mixed in with Swedish law in the others, then you have like honor killings on another side, gang warfare right next to that, and the rape statistics that keep climbing. Jeez Louise, dude, that's not integration. That's civilizational suicide. And it's being mandated by a government that claims to represent the people while telling them that they have no right to choose who lives next door. How does that work? And the Gen Z Swedes, dude, they're watching all this and they're fucking angry. Both the conservative and the liberal young Swedes are looking at what's happening. And they're saying that this is fucked because they're the ones who have to live with it. They're the ones getting raped. They're the ones that are watching their neighborhoods destroyed. They're the ones who don't have a country that looks anything like the Sweden that their grandparents knew. And the polls are showing it. The Sweden Democrats, by the way, the populist party that wants closed borders and return migration and the end to this insanity, they're gaining. The 2026 elections are looking like essentially a referendum on forced integration. That's pretty much what it's going to come down to. And the Social Democrats, might finally face the consequences of 50 plus years of failed policies. But even if the Sweden Democrats win, even if they close the borders tomorrow, even if they stop all this new migration completely, the damage is done, dude. You have hundreds of thousands of migrants who won't assimilate, who won't leave, who have birth rates way higher than native Swedes, who are having 5 or 6 kids while Swedish families only having 1 or 2 at most. The demographics are locked in, boys. Even without new migration, the Muslim population keeps growing. The parallel societies will keep expanding and the crime will keep increasing because you can't undo 50 years of mass immigration with one fucking election. Sweden is a warning. This is what happens when you let elites with donor money and globalist ideology dictate immigration policy. When you prioritize being called tolerant over protecting your own people and you refuse to demand assimilation, right? This is punishment of your own citizens for noticing the problems. And then you're trying to escape them. That's fucking wild. And when it all falls apart, when the crime is undeniable, when the cultural clashes are fucking everywhere and your people are fleeing, the elites will double down as if, bro. And they blame you for self-segregating, forcing mixing. They use your children as fucking tools. You have no right to choose your neighbor, dude. What is that? That's not democracy. That's authoritarianism. That's your government destroying your country and forcing you to participate in the destruction. The American parallel should be obvious for you guys right here. We're watching the same thing play out here. We had mass immigration from incompatible cultures that refused to fucking assimilate. They turned into their own carve-outs. They're voting in their own leadership, quite literally, and they're forcing out the natives in a sense. That's why the elites refuse to enforce the borders or demand assimilation. It's a cheap workforce for them and it divides the people. And that donor money, dude, that donor money is hard to turn down, especially if you need it to win an election. And that's what drives the policy. That's what's hurting, for example, the American worker. And when Americans notice and complain, they also got called racist. The only difference is that we're not as far down the path as Sweden is, for example, yet, right? Yet. But if the elites had their way, if Dems won, for example, or if the NGOs and donors and globalists got full control or are not dismantled totally by the time, let's just say, Vance is finishing with his 2 terms, if he gets to run twice and win, we'd be doing the same exact force mixing bullshit too. We're not that far behind. We'd be busing kids. We'd be reconstituting societies too, neighborhoods. We were already doing black flights. We were already having demographic shifts in small towns. Remember, they're eating the cats. They're eating the dogs. Yeah. You would have been told that you have no right to preserve your community. That's what America First was supposed to prevent. That's why borders matter for those Europeans that are listening. That's why assimilation matters. That's why you can't just import millions of people from the third fucking world and expect them to become whatever it is country that they moved into. For us, let's just say American. Sweden is like the laboratory experiment for what happens when you try and the experiment fails catastrophically. You get rape, bombs, mutilated women, and destroyed communities. And instead of admitting the failure and changing course, the Swedish government is forcing everybody to live in the hell of their failed experiment. That's what elite policy looks like. That is why Europe has an uprising of far right, as they call them, communities or populist leaders. Because if you thought America was bad, I just spelled out to you what's going on in Sweden. So anyways, let's get into some of these supers. We'll react to some videos. Why not? We're chilling. We're what? An hour, 20 minutes in? Let's see what we got here.
Roy Hay $5,741 $6.52. David Icke is right about shape-shifting reptiles ruling the world as crazy as it and work hard. Jordan Kavitzel is right about Illuminati sacrificing kids.
All right, brother. Appreciate you. Went hard. He went deep in the paint there. Okay.
SC $5.26. Swede here. Can confirm everything. One mother and daughter lost their legs after a hand grenade was thrown in their bedroom. The target lived next door.
Wow.